that because I'm angry at US foreign policy, it means I'm going to blow something up, is a terrible, terrible racism of low expectations of Muslims.
If I took out a piece of paper now and drew a cartoon, a stick figure, and said, this is Muhammad, it's not implausible to worry that the rest of my life will just be this deranged attempt not to be killed. You could improve the Quran and you could improve the Bible in 5 minutes to the benefit of everybody. And yet we can't rewrite these pages, so we're stuck with figuring out how to convince billions of people to interpret them in the most benign way. But if every page of the Quran had on the bottom of it a little footnote saying...
So based on the substance of the book, let's just begin with whether, what is Islam? Because you raise a particular question at the beginning of the book. Is it a religion of war or peace? And there's one narrative, which is it's been hijacked by radicals and extremists who are purporting to be of a certain faith and acting in ways that we all see on the front pages of the newspaper. But there's another way of thinking about it, which is that what we're seeing or what people are saying is at the core of the religion. So I'll ask you bluntly what you ask in the book, which is Islam a religion of war or peace?
Well, I'll take the first whack at that. I think we have different instincts, I think, Majid and I here, and my instincts for many conversations now are to defer to his instincts, because I think I had no interest in winning the debate for atheism against religion in my conversation with Majid. I was not trying to convince him that there is no God or that it's illegitimate intellectually to think that the Quran is in some sense, a divinely inspired book. That's not my purpose, and though I still hold those views, the real purpose of our collaboration is to figure out some path forward, politically and intellectually and ethically, to arrive at a future where we're not seeing the kind of mayhem and callousness and divisiveness born of religious differences. And so, but Majid takes the line in the book that it's neither a religion of war nor a religion of peace, it's a religion. And all religions have their toxic and their benign aspects. And it really depends on just what you emphasize. I'm a little more, I think if you just catch Majid at that moment, if that's all he says, what he's saying is indistinguishable from many apologists who are actually playing hide the ball with the articles of faith here. People like Reza Aslan and people who are well known to just dodge the matter and who think that it is tantamount to bigotry to single out Islam for any special attention at this moment in history. But Majid doesn't stop there, and that's why I had such a productive conversation with him. He admits that there's a link between specific ideas and specific behaviors. And so I think Islam has some specific ideas that are really problematic, which we discuss in the book. Specifically, a belief in martyrdom and a belief in jihad as incumbent upon any Muslim, certainly any Muslim male, in defense of the faith. And a certainty of paradise. I mean, this is a little dark jewel of religious demagoguery that I think we have to figure out some way to destroy intellectually. This conversation is, I think, the basis of a way forward in that direction.
So on the same question, but I want to touch on something Sam said earlier about this notion that any Muslim engaging in dialogue with a critic of Islam, with an atheist, with somebody like Sam or Ayan, is necessarily either a sellout, an Uncle Tom, a native informant, or any of the above. Yesterday, by a non-Muslim, left-wing, white, and particularly silver-spooned critic, I was called an Islamophobe. I want to address this head on before we proceed, if I may, because I think it's disgusting to delegitimize my voice in that way. And what I would like to say to them, and I hope they're listening, is the day that you have had to dodge neo-Nazi hammer attacks on the streets of Essex, as I have, the day that you've been arrested at gunpoint and profiled by police at the age of 15, as I have, the day that you've forcibly had your DNA taken from you and profiled at airports, as I have, and the day that you face the grip of a torturer in Egypt's dungeons because of your Islamist political views, as I have, is the day you get to talk to me about Islamophobia. The day you were born to Muslim parents, are a Muslim yourself and have a Muslim child, is the day you get to talk to me about anti-Muslim bigotry. Until that day, being a non-Muslim, and particularly being a white male, to speak to me and to police my conversation about my own religion and its future in this world, and to choose for me who I'm allowed to speak to, is a form of colonial patronage that I could do without. It's a reverse form of racism. It's a policing of the conversation. It's born of a racism of low expectations, because it assumes that the only good, it's the true good Muslim, bad Muslim game, by the way, because it assumes the only good Muslim is the angry Muslim, and there happens to be a bit of a brain malfunction in the heads of these people who assume that despite the fact I've been through all of that, I'm not sitting here in front of you ranting and raving and spitting and frothing at the mouth. Therefore, because I'm not angry, somehow I'm not the good Muslim. It's patronizing in the extreme. And in particular, as I said, the two people who have named, Sam's, I think, mentioned one of them, the two people who have called me a native informant or an Uncle Tom or an Islamophobe, both happen to be non-Muslim, white, middle-class American males who haven't seen any of what I've just described. And I think they need to just stop and check their privilege, first of all. And it's sad that the debate has got to this. To very quickly answer your question, therefore, I have a right to have a view on that question. And that question, whether Islam is a religion of peace or a religion of war, for some Muslims, it's a religion of war. For the vast majority of Muslims today, it's a religion of peace. Just like for the US, for Americans, for some Americans, the US Constitution supports the right to abortion, and for others it doesn't. The same document, the same text, is the subject of dispute and fierce dispute in this instance. And one of the things that we discuss in this dialogue is that actually if Islam is only what Muslims make it through the process of ijtihad or interpretation, if the vast majority of Muslims today are not jihadists, then only because that's what Muslims are interpreting it to be, today it happens to be by majority rule a religion of peace.
Calling a religion peaceful does not erase the ideas written inside it. The problem is not only a few bad people. The problem is that sacred texts can give bad ideas divine authority. In the Quran, paradise is promised to those who fight and die for God's cause, like in Quran 474 and 9111. Once violence is tied to eternal reward, reason becomes weaker. That is why religion is dangerous. It can turn human conflict into a holy mission.
But that's not to say that there is an incredibly vocal and disproportionately prominent minority within our own communities of Muslims who subscribe to the view not only that it's a religion of jihad and war, but are actually fighting and engaged in that war. And it's that vocal and organized, highly organized minority, as represented by ISIS, in some instances they're controlling countries, that we must challenge head on and accept the fact they exist and not obfuscate and bury our heads in the sand and pretend that this isn't really a problem.
So just to pick up on this, because both of your answers, both the first part, which is helpful for people to hear, and the second part are related in the sense that this colonial patronage, or what you both so adequately call in the book the Voldemort effect, that our inability to actually say the name, which is, it is not extremism, it is Islamic extremism, and you both criticize, or at least you criticize the Obama administration about its failure to sort of use the language or admit what it is. But confronting the ideology is challenging, because the ideology isn't just, the ideology is big. There's different concentric circles, as you describe, of people who believe in certain parts of the ideology or certain parts of the religion. So how do you get people to actually talk about the ideology and begin to reform it or rethink it or become nonviolent if we're also afraid to even say, this isn't extremism, it's Islamic extremism?
Yeah, I mean, I read all the Harry Potter books in prison, and it's where I got that analogy from for the Voldemort effect. And I've told J.K. Rowling this, and actually I'm not sure how pleased she is that we're applying it to Islamist extremism. But effectively what it means for those of you who, and I hope everyone's read the books, those of you who haven't read those books, there's a bad guy in the Harry Potter books called Voldemort, that people, the two things. First of all, they deny he exists, and they're also, while denying that he exists, because he's meant to be dead, but he actually isn't really dead, the second thing is they're too scared to name him. So instead what they say is, he who must not be named is dead. Now, I took that and said, look, that Voldemort effect, being too scared, too petrified to name the problem when actually it's staring at you in the face, is what's happened with Islamist extremism. And the problem is we have been unable to name the problem, led by President Obama himself all the way down. Whereas actually recently, Prime Minister Cameron, not least because we've been working through Quilliam very hard to advise him on this, but among many others, has named the Islamist ideology just last month in his speech and his intervention on this debate. I'm hoping the next president of the US does the same. What's the problem with not being able to name the problem? There are two problems here. External to Muslims and within Muslim communities. If we can't name Islamist extremism and we just say the ideology of extremism, the problem is that outside of Muslim communities, many non-Muslims will assume you're talking about Islam, the religion itself, and all Muslims. That's the first problem, because by not naming it, you're blurring those lines and you're increasing the obfuscation. And trust me, there are a whole bunch of nut jobs out there who would take delight, who would take pleasure in stigmatizing every single Muslim, which Sam doesn't do, nor does Ayan. They don't do that. I've personally spoken to both of them about this, and in many instances watched their speeches. But there are plenty of people out there that would like to do this. So that's danger number one. By not naming it and isolating it from the religion, you're blurring those lines and making it easier for people to blame every single Muslim. The danger within Muslim communities is that by not naming the problem, we are disempowering the voices of those reforming Muslims who are attempting and struggling, who are vulnerable within their own communities and who are struggling to bring about that reform dialogue within Muslim communities. We are disempowering their voices. We are not allowing them to make the case within the religion of Islam to say, the problem isn't Islam, fair enough, but there is something we have to address. And that something is this Islamist ideology that has hijacked our voice. But actually, by depriving them of that language, what are they left to say? How are they meant to have that debate? And instead what happens is every gay Muslim, every feminist Muslim, every liberal Muslim, every dissenting voice is silenced, is shut down, is stigmatized, and those who shout the loudest are the ones dominating the discourse. And then we complain when mainstream society says, where are the moderates? We're not even giving them a lexicon to have this conversation.
Sam, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, well, I think we should be candid about how depressing the state of the conversation is around this conversation. Because, for instance, I think at one point you said to me that you either expected or in fact were receiving more criticism with regard to talking to me than talking to Islamists or even
Absolutely,
jihadis.
yeah.
So he could go and talk to a failed suicide bomber, right?
And everyone's happy.
And that's completely legitimate use of his time, and of course we need to have conversations. How else could we move forward? But talking to famous atheists over here, that's as controversial as it gets. And that is of a piece with this liberal or pseudo-liberal criticism that both of us are getting on this topic, where people can't seem to see that, for one, that we're talking about ideas and their consequences. And everything we say about Islam or Islamism or jihadism, or depending on what the focus is, conservative Islam, applies to white converts to the faith, and it applies to people in 100 different countries and of a wide variety of ethnicities. If ever I say something disparaging about Islam compared to Hinduism or Buddhism, well, then that has nothing to do with racism or the colors of people's skin. I mean, so racism and bigotry against people based on ethnicity or the country they're born, that has nothing to do with this conversation at all. And so this meme of Islamophobia that has been thrown up to prevent conversations of this kind is really quite destructive. And it's something that, I mean, the hypocrisy here should be just shattering to liberals in particular, because you have, as Macha just said, we are abandoning the women and the freethinkers and the gays and the public intellectuals and the apostates in these are the most vulnerable people on earth in Muslim societies, where you have atheist bloggers, or not even atheist bloggers, just secular bloggers.
People like Raif Badawi.
Getting hacked to death, and liberals are not only not giving them any tools by which to better their lives, they are castigating the people who are trying to shine a light on the disproportionate nature of the problem here. To be gay, or even a woman in a country like Afghanistan, or Saudi Arabia, or Bangladesh, I mean, these are unlucky places to be in a minority of that kind. And so it's as we argue at some length in the book, liberalism has really failed us here. And it's not, and you can criticize Christianity all you want, and liberals will never bat an eye. You can criticize Mormonism all you want, but the moment you try to shine a light on the problem of, I think, appropriately described as Islamism for this conversation, just the full armamentarium of political correctness and cries of racism just hits you full in the face, and it is a thankless job. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to have this conversation because it is so poisonous, especially on college campuses.
One of the good things that's come from, for me, that's come from our dialogue, is that at least I'm sensing that the emphasis has shifted from one about the metaphysical conversation about whether God really exists or not, to the political and social values that we need for just and stable societies. And that's where I'd like to see the conversation go. Because I think the metaphysical conversation about whether God exists or not is less interesting to me. What's more interesting is that you can have the Church of England in the United Kingdom, but they won't be chopping people's heads off, and they won't be lashing people like Raif Badawi just for writing a blog in Saudi Arabia. And so if we can get to that stage, then we can have these conversations without fear of attack and and lynch mobs coming to the doors. So I'd like that emphasis, and I think this book leads to that. I don't know if you agree, Sam, but I think that what comes from this dialogue is that the emphasis is very clear and loud, is on reasserting liberalism and civil liberties and human rights that cut both ways. Not just in favor of minority communities, but also in certain instances, minority communities have responsibilities to others, to mainstream society, to reciprocate those civil liberties in their interactions. And I think that's the focus that I'd like to continue through these dialogues with others, to make it sort of a real focus on liberalism and values and ideas rather than whether God exists or not.
Religion gets special protection that no other idea deserves. People criticize politics, science, and business every day. But the second religion is questioned, critics are called hateful. That protects the belief system, not the vulnerable. Christianity has the same problem. Deuteronomy 13 calls for death against people who lead others to different gods. Leviticus 20:13 calls for death over same-sex behavior. 1 Timothy 2:12 tells women not to have authority over men. These are not harmless ideas. When ancient texts are treated as holy, human rights become negotiable.
But Sam, I think that's right, and the substance of the book gets into that. Sam, though, you highlight in the book that the two basic tenets of Islam, it's hatred or rejection of infidels, and this notion of a post-earth paradise, means that linking Islam with liberalism, right, with gay rights, women's rights, whatever you want to call it, may be desirable, but it's essentially based on a pretense. It's essentially intellectually dishonest. Is that fair, or do you think that they are compatible?
Well, the path forward that Majid really found in our conversation, and you'll see that it took some effort to convince me to sort of follow him through that, keyhole-sized aperture in this just wall of medieval ignorance, is that basically that by the lights of Islam, there is no true Islam. There's no pope. There's no place to stand within Islam to say that your view of the faith is the truly canonical one. And so there is a radical kind of pluralism there, which reformers can take advantage of, where you can say, listen, there's whatever, you can be as doctrinaire as you want. You can be right of Mullah Omar in terms of your your theological commitments. But what you can't be is someone who thinks that that applies to all Muslims for all time. Now, I remain quite skeptical that we can have conversations with people of Mullah Omar's sort. We're not going to have a dialogue with al-Baghdadi or the rest of ISIS. But as a general matter, from Majid's side, that the way forward is to recognize that this pluralism demands a commitment to secularism. It demands, because there is no one version of Islam, you can't, you have to keep your version in this zero-sum contest with all these other versions out of public policy and out of politics. And then that commitment to secularism can hopefully open a space for genuine liberalism and a genuine commitment to all these other values that we want, which aren't best expressed in any religion, frankly. They're the result of a modern conversation about ethics and politics and human rights.
Yeah, I think that's, you've just done a wonderful job summarizing my stance there, so I won't repeat it. But I think it's important, if you read the dialogue, you'll see that there are some surprising positions that traditional Islamic theologians have taken, which have been very literalist stances, but have led to very liberal outcomes. I'll just mention one, and I think it's important at this stage for me to say, look, I'm not a religious leader. I'm not even devout. I want to make that very clear. Some of you will see me, and you'll see me doing things that aren't typically devout. You know, I won't elaborate. But that's because I don't claim to be devout or religious. I am a Muslim who is not devout. Secondly, I don't speak on behalf of all Muslims. I'm not a leader for Muslims. I'm not a religious leader. I'm not a community representative. In fact, I find the whole concept of community representatives troubling and problematic. In particular, they tend to be aging men, graying men who are especially socially conservative, who deign to speak on behalf of everyone. So I don't subscribe to that model in the first place. So I don't want anyone to think what I say means all Muslims must think this. But that's part of the beauty, you see. That's exactly what I'm advocating, to open that debate up to pluralism. We have within Islamic history and theology a concept, because there's no clergy, as Sam mentioned, that if anybody subscribes to a religious injunction and they are correct, they get 2 rewards. فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. And if they are incorrect, فَمَنْ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. They still rewarded 1. Because that process of legal interpretation from the scripture is not wrong if you're legally qualified to do it. And the rest of the people, known as the awam, the followers, the muqallideen, those who follow a theologian, aren't judged for whichever option they choose. So there's one example I'll give you from the dialogue that I mentioned in discussion with Sam. And that is that from the earliest exegesis of the Quran, from the earliest tafsir, the Hanafi school of law, comes a man known as Abu Bakr al-Jassas, who was the first mufassir, or the first exegete of the Quran, to elaborate and explain upon its meanings. And he took a very literalist view of the word khamr in Arabic, which is commonly translated today to mean alcohol. He took a very literalist approach to that word, and he didn't budge from its linguistic meaning, which was, and everyone concedes this point, by the way, that originally khamr only meant grape wine, the wine from grapes. It doesn't mean whiskey, it doesn't mean gin, it doesn't mean beer, it only means the wine from grapes. And the early Hanafis, which was the first school of jurisprudence, I must emphasize, the closest in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say that therefore every other form of alcohol is legal apart from grape wine. Now that sounds like a particularly outright position today when considering where the state of affairs are for the vast majority of Muslims who don't touch any form of alcohol. But I give this example not to take a position on it, but simply to emphasize something. And that is that form of pluralism that existed in those early years, that has been lost because of the rise of both fundamentalism and Islamism, and I distinguish between the two in the dialogue. The only way forward is for us to recognize that. And of course, relative to medieval periods, it may have been good, but actually there's a lot in the medieval time that we don't want to reclaim. But we have to just recognize that exists, because no one has the right to claim that they have the definitive view on any scripture, on any text. So the logical conclusion from all of this can only be secularism, because there's no pope in Islam. And that's essentially in a nutshell what I'm arguing in the dialogue with Sam, and what I hope that Sam has kind of recognized in what I'm saying as well.
Majid, I know we have to go to questions soon. I want to ask you, though, about grievance and what you hear. And I know there's no single spokesperson or whatever, but and violence. Because I think from the perspective of people who are from the United States, who see what's going on in the world, the linkages between wrong linkages between the religion and the grievance that then leads to grievance of U.S. policy, grievance of Iraq, grievance of Afghanistan, whatever it is, to then violence seems to be a straight line. So what do you say to the person who says, look, people can be, annoyed at the U.S. for all sorts of reasons. Why is it only one religion that actually takes that grievance to violence and therefore requires all sorts of, policies by the United States for good or for bad, which then leads to a new level of grievances, which then leads to more violence?
So just for those who aren't familiar with these debates, which in the policy circles, as you're very familiar with, are quite common, the question is whether radicalization is caused by foreign policy grievances, and therefore do we need to change our foreign policy, or is it caused by, say, ideology and something else entirely, and therefore we need to address ideology? What I say is that human beings react to circumstances differently. We're not all the same. We're social animals. We're not like water. We don't all boil at 100 degrees Celsius, and we don't all freeze at 0. And so actually the best way to explain this is it's usually radicalization is due to a combination of factors. There are 4 factors I name in the dialogue with Sam. I talk about grievances having a role in that. If somebody's not angry, they're not going to look for an alternative form of discourse in the first place. So there needs to be an anger there. So there's an element that the grievances play a role. Then there's an identity crisis that comes about. Then there's a charismatic recruiter as a third factor. And the fourth is the role that the ideology plays. But this overly simplistic view that because I'm angry at US foreign policy, it means I'm going to blow something up is a terrible, terrible racism of low expectations of Muslims. It assumes that a brown young Muslim man, because he can't handle his anger, is just going to blow something up. It's a terrible explanation for what's going on. And actually, Islamists promote it because they want US foreign policy to change. They tell us that all the time. Bin Laden's speeches were all about changing policy towards the Middle East because he wanted to stop the support for Arab regimes so that he could overthrow them, as happened, eventually with the Arab uprising. So it's no surprise Islamists peddle this myth, but it's actually particularly worrying when those on my own political biases, the political center to center left, peddle this myth. Because the problem I have with it is the following. Look, I opposed the invasion of Iraq from a jail cell in Egypt. I've always been opposed to the Bush Jr.-led invasion of Iraq. But what I can't do is say that that's the reason ISIS exists. Of course, there's a contributing factor. We can't say that it's got nothing to do with it. But what I can't say is that that's the reason, that's the cause. Because if you think about it, you follow that logic through, why on earth are ISIS enslaving and raping Yazidi women en masse? What did these poor Yazidis do to anyone, anywhere? Which country did they invade? Or if you go to Afghanistan, look at the Taliban. What is forcing a man to grow a beard at the end of a lash of a whip, or forcing a woman to cover her face and her entire head, or stoning her to death because she's holding hands with the wrong person? What does any of that have to do with any invasion of any country? So there's something a bit more going on here, and it's too simplistic just to put all the blame on foreign policy mistakes. And of course, America, when it intervened in Kosovo to save the lives of Muslims, never got the credit for that. So it's a very simplistic worldview, and it needs to be challenged.
Religion fails because it cannot even agree with itself. One believer says the text means peace. Another says it means control. Another says it means punishment. That is not divine clarity. That is human interpretation pretending to be God's voice. Christianity has the same problem. The Bible regulates slavery in Exodus 21 and tells slaves to obey masters in 1 Peter 2:18. Modern morality did not come from that. It came from people finally putting human rights above ancient religion.
Sam, picking up on Majid's point, for a well-known atheist, why are you engaging in this conversation? I mean, what is it that would be, let's say I know you're not in politics, but that you would want to see change because of this conversation? Or is it just a good conversation to have?
Well, I think this is the political and ethical problem of our time. I mean, in the largest, most generic sense, I think the contest between good ideas and bad ideas, and the contest between good methodologies at arriving at ideas and bad ones, I think that is the most important distinction to get right, both personally and at the level of societies. And religion at this moment has a monopoly on being able to promulgate bad ideas without the usual collisions with clear-thinking people in the world. There's a taboo against criticizing bad thinking, illogical thinking, false claims to evidence, false claims to knowledge. And I think this has just a destabilizing effect on human cooperation in general, because all we have is a choice between conversation and violence when things really matter. And when you're telling me that there's certain things you know to be true, but the way you know them is not based on any kind of publicly available mode of evidence or reasoning, and these things are not only non-negotiable, they're the most important principles in your life, this is intrinsically divisive. And this worries me across the board with all religion, but with certain religions, their commitments don't matter all that much. You know, the fact that Jains won't kill animals and are rather dogmatic vegetarians, that's not a problem for anyone. And we're not going to see Jain terrorists insofar as they are, and this is why fundamentalism is a term of art and a red herring. The fundamentalism is not a problem if the fundamentals of your religion are totally benign. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less anyone has to worry about you. And that is rather obviously not true of Islam as a religion, nor is it true of many other religions. But Islam has a few variables that we've just touched on briefly that are uniquely problematic. And if I could just touch on this notion of grievance that Majid just discussed, I think we also have to admit that certain grievances really are just born of religion. They really are just theological. Mm-hmm. And if you push back hard enough on the theology, discredit the theology, that is what you need to do to contain the risk born of these grievances. And so, drawing cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if I took out a piece of paper now and drew a cartoon, a stick figure, and said, "This is Muhammad," it's not implausible to worry that the rest of my life will just be this deranged attempt not to be killed by some religious maniac who thinks I have crossed a line there. There's only one religion on earth today that is doing that to people, and this is not based on U.S. foreign policy. It's not based on anything other than specific religious ideas. And that what liberals have, where liberals have grown confused on this topic is they think there's some tension between free speech and freedom of religion, whereas there's not. If your free exercise of your religion requires that I follow its precepts, that's not freedom of religion. That is theocracy. Mm. Right? So, and there's nothing I could say on this stage tonight that infringes upon anyone's freedom of religion. There's nothing. People have the political freedom to practice whatever faith they want in this country, and we all, as just sane participants in a civil society, have to recognize that all of these religious ideas have to be on the table to be criticized, mocked, satirized, and that has to be the line between free speech and its erosion. That, for me, is the most crucial line to be very clear about.
Yeah, what we say, there's a maxim that we use in the dialogue that no idea is above scrutiny and no people are beneath dignity. Just to touch on the point Sam just made, scrutiny, satire, critique of any idea must necessarily be not only allowed but actively encouraged. That doesn't mean that we pick on individual Muslim people. That's anti-Muslim bigotry. Let's put away the term Islamophobia. It's unhelpful, because the term Islamophobia is used to silence the debate, as it has been done with me by a non-Muslim, interestingly. But actually it's used to shut the debate down, because actually what it does is it confuses the notion of critiquing any religion, in this case Islam as a religion, and picking on individual Muslim people. So for that, I use the phrase anti-Muslim bigotry, which is real and it exists, especially in Europe, with the rise of far-right parties across the continent. It's real and it exists and it's a problem. But that's not the same thing as scrutinizing any religion, and in this instance, the religion of Islam. So no idea is above scrutiny, and no people are beneath dignity. If you want to just imagine the line between those two, it's quite easy to imagine. There's a difference between Sam drawing a stick figure and holding up a stick figure and calling that the Prophet Muhammad. Incidentally, I retweeted a stick figure of Jesus and Mo. Jesus saying hello and Mo saying how you doing. And it was not offensive to me in any way. And I said, Allahu Akbar minhu, which means God is greater than to take offense at this stick figure, right? And I got lots of death threats for it. But the difference between that, which is focusing on the founder of one of the world's greatest religions, my religion, and between that and actually saying all Muslims are inherently disease-ridden, rabies and vermin in the continent of Europe, and we need to cleanse Europe of them. That's a very, very different statement. And sometimes we just, in our anger, irrational anger, we confound and confuse those two. I was on the way preparing for this dialogue today. I was in the gym, working out. And in walks Sam. Actually, it's the first time I'd seen him for a long time, and I'm in the gym, and he surprises me. He appears in front of me. So I look at him, and I think, oh my God, I feel like a bit like Apollo and Rocky here. So Apollo lost, so you can be Apollo. But what happens is I'm in the middle of training, and Sam pulls his headphones out and says, you can tell them that I'm listening to Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Now, for those of you who don't know, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan is a very great and late Pakistani Sufi mystic singer, respected across the world by some of the best musicians, including the Beatles, who had great reverence for his music. And he's a Sufi leader in Pakistan. I happen to have him on my iPhone as well. But the reason I mention that is here's Sam Harris, who's often accused of anti-Muslim bigotry. Let's put aside the fact that who on earth trains to Sufi mystical music in the first place, right?
Religion collapses when it is treated like every other claim. Christianity asks people to believe the impossible, then calls doubt a spiritual failure. Hebrews 11:1 praises faith in things not seen. John 20:29 praises those who believe without seeing. Mark 16:16 says, whoever does not believe will be condemned. That is not evidence. That is pressure. Real truth does not need threats, taboos, or special protection. If an idea cannot survive questions, mockery, and evidence, it should not run anyone's life.
I mean, there's me with techno dance going in my head while I'm trying to lift these weights, and he's listening to very, very calming, soothing Sufi music while he's training. But putting that aside, here's a man who's often accused of anti-Muslim bigotry, listening to Sufi music. Now, that's because he understands the difference between scrutinizing an idea and having or harboring anti-Muslim bigotry as a person. And if he didn't understand that idea, he would not be listening to one of the greatest Sufi mystics and musicians that Pakistan has ever produced. Instead, he'd be boycotting that man because he's a Muslim. And I think it's important just to emphasize that point and make that distinction.
On that note, I'm going to open up the microphones to whomever wants to ask a question with an emphasis on question. Please identify yourself and ask a quick question of one or both of the panelists so that we can continue the dialogue. You can go ahead first, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you, Majid and Sam. Thank you both.
Yeah,
I
thank
should
you.
do that first.
Thank you.
And to say that we literally got through about 10% of the depth and sensitivity and creativity of the book is an understatement. So stay tuned.
Hi, thank you both. My name is Zuhair Mazouz. I'm an Arab journalist. I wanted to say very frankly that I liked Mr. Nawaz's analogy between the debate happening in the Middle East, North Africa, and the one happening in the United States. You used the Quran to describe the debate happening in the Middle East, North Africa about governance, and then in the United States you used the US Constitution. And that to me is very symbolic of how far off these two regions of the world are from each other. These are not two types, in my opinion, these are not two types of government, these are two levels. When we ask whether Islam is a religion of war or of peace, my answer usually is that it does not matter. If you ask that question about Christianity in the United States, it won't matter because you live in a society that protects thought, freedom of religion, freedom of choice, freedom of conscience. And the dream of us, our dream in the Arab world is to reach that level where we can actually not care whether any religion is a religion of peace or war, because we are in a place that is governed by rule of law, freedom of choice, free speech, all these universal human rights, which is why I have a big problem with the term Muslim world.
Yeah.
Can I have you ask a question now?
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. That's okay.
Yeah,
So, good
that was my question. Do you think we should keep using that term, or is it more convenient because it's simple for the rest of the world to understand us? Thank you.
Okay, so may your kind multiply. I really, really hope that lots of young Arabs like you speak in the way that you just did, and it's incredibly encouraging to hear you say that. I agree with everything you said. If you notice in my responses to the questions, I don't say Muslim country, and I certainly don't say Muslim world. I say Muslim majority countries. To take Egypt as an example, 20% of Egypt's population are Coptic Christian. So it's not a Muslim country. It's a country for Egyptians. If we're discussing having a religious discussion, then that's why I'll say Muslim majority, because that 80% is a majority, but it's unfair on the minorities to call it a Muslim country. It should be a secular republic. Secular in the American, not the French sense of the word. So no, I don't use the word Muslim world either, because it unfairly homogenizes 1.6 billion people and assumes that they will think the same both in religion and in politics. And in fact, they probably disagree more with each other over religion and politics than Europe and America do. So it's an unfair homogenization, and I thank you for your intervention.
Sir.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Topaz. I'm at the law school. I just had a question. I was recalling earlier in the day a United Nations report that was describing the democracy deficit in the Arab world, and that report from maybe 5 years ago basically was running regressions and whatever they were saying, and said that the problem in the Arab world in terms of the democracy deficit, so to speak, has very little to do with Islam and has much to do with political, economic, social factors, institutions in the Arab world, and the fact that these countries are Muslim majority has very little to do with it. I'm curious why, when you're speaking about illiberalism, values towards women, things of that nature, why you believe that the isolating factor is in fact the Muslim religion, as opposed to some of those other factors that have driven illiberal societies there. Thank you.
Sam.
Was that for me or Majid?
Whomever. I happen to know because I've known that you have spoken about that a few times.
We can give Apollo credit.
Yeah. Well, I think again, it comes down to specific ideas and their specific consequences. So there are other variables in play on many of these questions, but when you ask, why, just let me take the most illiberal example we have currently. Why is the Islamic State doing the specific things they're doing? Why are they throwing gays off of rooftops? Why are they crucifying people? Why are they taking sex slaves? You can draw a straight line from those specific practices. I mean, it's exactly like asking, why do Catholics eat a cracker during the Mass, and say something about the miracle of transubstantiation. I mean, it is doctrine in practice, and I'm not discounting that poverty and lack of opportunity and being beleaguered by neighbors who are stealing your resources, or this deranges people in kind of a generic way, but there are specific versions of Islam. The political version we call Islamism for the purposes of this book, and I think that's a very useful term going forward, which are a kind of recipe for intolerance and in its various forms, whether it's intolerance towards women or gays or free speech or civil society as we know it. And it is separable from the other conditions on the ground. You can be very wealthy. I mean, so by your analysis, it is an absolute mystery why someone getting his medical degree in the UK, a third-generation British citizen, would go off to join ISIS and think it's the best use of his time to go saw the heads off of journalists and aid workers, right? And just to realize that the sawing the heads off of journalists and aid workers, that's not their My Lai massacre over there. That's not what some specific individuals did in extremis and then had to apologize for to their culture. That is their outreach to the rest of the community. That is their effort to put their best theological foot forward to the rest of the world. And some number of people find that incredibly attractive. And it's not an accident, because you can go back to the texts and cash out those behaviors. And that's the problem we have to be honest about and deal with. And that's, you can, there's a time and place not to spell it out in all of its gory reality. So I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a politician, and I never will be. And there's probably obvious reasons for that. But yeah, it's not purely a matter of politics and economics.
A country should never be defined by a religion. The moment law bends to scripture, minorities lose. Christians know this too, even if they pretend otherwise. When the church had power, it punished heresy, censored science, and defended slavery with Bible verses. Galileo was condemned because evidence challenged religious authority. That is the pattern. Religion is safest when it has no political power. Human rights come from secular law, open debate, and evidence, not from priests, prophets, or ancient books.
Though it includes that as well.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, oh, no.
It includes politics and economics
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Samir Shaibi, and I'm a student here at HKS. So I have a question that kind of stems from a couple of comments you made tonight. Have you looked at, either through conversation or within the book, at the premise of self-critique or a reassessment of the religion from within the, I guess, the Muslim community? So that question basically stems from one comment you made has an answer to the very first question that has been asked, whether Islam is a religion of peace or war. You said martyrdom is very much part of Islam, but I feel also that, caveat here because I'm Muslim, the religion can give us the tool of doing that self-critique. In the Quran, there is mentions of martyrdom being a lesser form of jihad, because Islam is very much a religion of self-struggle first, and martyrdom and going to do jihad is kind of a last resort kind of choice. And the other thing is that the other comment that kind of stemmed that question is the thing you said around rights of women, gay rights, etc., etc. I think when it comes to women, I think we should make a difference between what the religion say and what the cultural aspects of certain society push people to do so. And I'm not sure whether you make that kind of difference within the book between what cultural aspects and religious aspects kind of taught those societies.
Yeah, a little bit. We don't really go into much detail on that particular point, but I certainly acknowledge those differences, and there's kind of a spectrum of effects. There's what's in the Quran, there's what's in the Hadith, of the larger literature that recounts the sayings of the Prophet, and then there's the rest of culture that has been accreted around these texts. And yes, certain things are just excruciatingly clearly spelled out in Scripture, and certain other things are just inferred by, association with what's there, and then certain things are just a matter of culture. And I think it matters, however, that Scripture, and this is not just the Quran, this is most Scripture, it matters that these texts are, ethically speaking, not the wisest books we have. And it matters that most human beings think they were dictated by the creator of the universe. You could improve the Quran and you could improve the Bible in 5 minutes to the benefit of everybody. And yet we can't rewrite these pages, so we're stuck with figuring out how to convince billions of people to interpret them in the most benign way. But if every page of the Quran had on the bottom of it a little footnote saying, oh, by the way, don't kill anyone for their beliefs, and homosexuals just fine, don't worry about it. And women are the equals of men, despite what I seem to have said in these other surahs, women are every bit the equals of men, we would live in a better world. Muslims would live in a better world. And it's hard, because the Quran doesn't say anything like that, and because the Quran gives you a very plausible rationale for viewing women as the property of men more than truly their equals, Muslims are left trying to do some very acrobatic theology on that point, and they have to do that acrobatic theology, and Majid is convinced that they have the tools to do that, and I think you're convinced that they have the tools to do that, but it would be a hell of a lot easier if somebody with 21st century values could just write a really good page in the Quran and slip it in there.
So on this point, thank you for your intervention. And if I'd like to say something on this as well. So personally, for historical, we also address whether the Quran should be censored or changed in the dialogue. And we both end up agreeing that for both historical and pragmatic reasons, actually it's an absurd idea. You want to preserve a historical document as it is. You don't want to start editing historical documents and pretending they never existed, because they have value in and of themselves. And that's me speaking just through a secular lens. But at the same time, Muslims, and I'm really glad with what you said and the way that you view your faith, but unfortunately there are many, many others who don't, and they're causing some problems in the world today. So I think we have to confront that head on. And though we know that lots and lots of people think like you and me, we also have to be honest and acknowledge that others, when they see passages in the Quran such as as-sariqu was-sariqatu faqta'u aydihima, the male and female thief cut off their hands, or azani was-zaniyatu fajliduhuma mi'ata jalda, the fornicators, lash them 100 lashes, or so on and so forth, that are passages directly from the Quran, that there are people out there that take these, not just individuals, there are regimes that take these passages vacuously and enforce them upon the rest of society. Saudi Arabia is one such example. It still beheads people, it still cuts off hands, albeit surgically, for theft, and it still lashes people for blogs, as I mentioned, Raif Badawi, who's being lashed as we speak. So there are entire regimes, and there are groups such as ISIS, who follow that vacuous interpretation of what they literally find within the passages. And I think it's incredibly helpful if Muslims like you and me own that, are honest about it, say, yes, there's a challenge we have here, and let's open up that debate. One of the things I mentioned in this dialogue with Sam is that how historically people have got around some of these issues. The last ever legitimate caliphate for Muslims, you will know, was the Uthmani Khilafah, the Ottoman Caliphate. The Ottomans took these passages known as the hudud laws, the penal codes, and the Sheikh of Islam of the Ottoman Caliphate, the leader of the Ottoman Caliphate's theological reasoning, came along and said, through religious reasoning, he said, we're not going to use this anymore, and he adopted the French penal code instead. And that was done in a caliphate by the Sheikh of Islam. Right? So there have been attempts to reconcile this, but today, sadly, due to the very modern rise of Islamism and fundamentalism, which have been rising side by side, perhaps I should just distinguish. Islamism, for me, is the desire to enforce any version of Islam over society. Fundamentalism, or incredibly conservative religious practice in a Muslim context, is those who are incredibly rigid and socially conservative and regressive in their practices, even if they don't want to enforce those on others. Both phenomena have been rising. You know, the Saudi form of Salafism has been rising and Islamism has been rising. And they're competing with each other for Muslim attentions. We've got to be honest and challenge that head on. And I really do wish, more Muslims were as vocal about this challenge as they are, unfortunately, vocal about irrelevant things such as people in Europe depicting cartoons, which frankly shouldn't hurt God. It doesn't hurt God. It doesn't hurt you or me or the Prophet. It shouldn't hurt anyone because it's a cartoon. But we'd rather burn buildings and kill people over that in Muslim majority countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan, where they're killing each other over cartoons thousands of miles away, than focusing their attentions on the self-scrutiny that you very correctly mentioned. They should be looking at their own societies and how to improve them.
Here is the brutal problem for religion. The holy books are not morally advanced. They are ancient books full of ancient values. Christians do the same damage control. They say the Bible is perfect, then spend their lives explaining away the ugly parts. Numbers 31 allows women and girls to be taken after war. Deuteronomy 22 treats women like property in sexual law. Ephesians 5:22 tells wives to submit to husbands. If a book needs constant reinterpretation to sound decent today, then modern morality is better than the book? So here's the question. If religion really came from an all-knowing God, why do humans keep having to fix it, soften it, and reinterpret it to make it moral? Comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more.